tell you that I appear before you today is my alter ego, Seamus McDuffie. I hope that a number of you remember your McGuffey readers from way back when. I have to give thanks to Susan, who convinced me I could do this, and my daughter Gretchen, who showed me how to find the PowerPoint thing on a computer. And then she and Christine getting these pictures onto the computer in some magical way that brings us to this morning. Somebody asked about the program and what prompted it. And initially, we have about 5 huge albums of pictures from Ireland. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have a travelogue? And then I realized, what a waste of your time. You can all go on the internet and do that yourself. So what has evolved has become, for me, a big history lesson that I would share with you. Let us begin by taking a look on the left of Ireland and its location relative to England, Wales, and Scotland. If you're not aware, once upon a time, England was connected to Ireland by a land bridge. And many people at first thought that right up here would be the place where the land bridge would have existed. However, the geologists have shown that the depth of the channel at that point in time is way too deep for there ever to have been a land bridge. And more likely, it appeared down here. You can almost see how Ireland was just cut out of this. Because once the Ice Age came, waters rose, glaciers came, and formed what we now know is the independent, freestanding island of Ireland. One of the interesting things in finding out about the lack of a land bridge means that there are no snakes or reptiles on the country of Ireland, thus debunking big time the myth that St. Patrick drove all the saints out. Sorry about that, Patrick, but science rules. Anyway, the country itself, to give you somewhat of a comparison, is comparable to the size of Indiana. Not real big, even though on the picture here it looks pretty substantial. In the scope of things, it would be one of our medium-sized to smaller states in the United States. Located in now the middle of the ocean, the water around it profoundly affects its climate. Ireland, from December to June, averages temperatures between 40 and 60 degrees centigrade, and then is warmer through the rest of the year. Amazingly, Fahrenheit.
Yeah,
That's
sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, that would be cold. But not only does the weather be impacted by the water surrounded, but also one of the predominant features of Ireland is its rainfall. The coast here starting down here, all the way up. Averages 250 days of rain in a given year. If you live over on this side, it's not quite as bad. It's only 180 days of rain. I will tell you, however, Christine and I made 3 trips there, totaling 42 days. And the luck of the Irish was obviously shining upon us as we experienced 3 days of rain in those 42 days. As we move on, let's take a look at the geography of the country. The coastlines, especially on the Atlantic, can be described as foreboding or rugged. This is very typical of what you would find along the Atlantic, but unusual is way back in here. You can even see a cluster of homes pretty close to the ocean side. Thank you for more technical assistance. This is on the northern part of Ireland, with Christine standing there in a rain suit. Even though it wasn't raining, rain suits were very good to have, given the winds that came off of these wonderful places. This is an unusual sight along the Atlantic, a sheltered harbor where you can find boats. For the most part, all the harbors and the major shipping places in the island still today are on the eastern side of the country. One of the things that we found amazing was the incredible vistas as you drove down country roads to the ocean. Christine, one of the world's greatest navigators, could find some of the most narrow roads and passageways to get us out to the edge of these cliffs. And if you look at this, any of you who are golfers and watched this Pebble Beach tournament this past week, get a feel for what it's like to be along a rocky coast. Well, they were daunting in terms of places to live. They provide wonderful opportunities for lakeside golf courses. That could be another whole series in and of itself. But for those of you who are golfers, this is a par 3 hole hidden amongst those dunes with a pot bunker over here and winds off the ocean, generally somewhere between 20 and 30 miles an hour. A wonderful challenge to play these courses. As we move to the interior, here is a typical valley view. The interior of the country is a series of mountains encompassing wonderful valleys down below. You can see down here some buildings. This picture was taken from the Ring of Kerry, if any of you have been there. Instead of going in a major loop around the ring, Christine and I decided to go to the end, backtrack, and go up and over. And this is a picture from the top of the mountain on the Ring of Kerry, looking down into the valleys below. The geography of the country is really incredible. The glaciers' effect and the rocks that they left dominate great portions of the land. As we first discovered the Burin, which is a national park, by the way, but not a sign anywhere, no entrance fee, no restrictions. You drive up in your car and get out and walk on to this incredible, almost desolate landscape. And you say, how do people ever exist on land like this? But one of the wonderful things about nature is with a little rain and sunshine, this is the same general area in full bloom. It provided for the farmers in the area wonderful grazing land for their sheep, not so much for the cattle who could never negotiate those rocky areas. But the Buren itself did provide wonderful grazing areas, not only for the sheep, but for goats. We talked about access. One of the few places that had a gate simply to keep tourists from leaving it open so that the cattle and sheep would get away. And farmers built stiles that are spread out across their land to provide you easy access. Obviously today with our walkers it'd be a little bit of a challenge, but back then it was certainly possible. But this was very typical of getting a chance to go back into some architectural ruins way back in here. When we first went to Ireland in 1998, it hadn't been discovered. There was no traffic. There was no fees. You simply could go wherever you want. One of the other major geological characteristics is the peat bogs of the island. 1/5 of Ireland is covered in peat bogs. Interestingly enough, you can't do much in a peat bog. You can't even let your cattle go on to a peat bog because below about 2 inches of soil lies the peat. And you can see the wall here that this man has dug, and he's excavated the peat over here and is now starting on this peat. Pretty much done by hand. Cut in blocks, vertically and horizontally, and then piled up to dry. This decaying vegetable matter proved to be invaluable for the Irish as a source of heat. This is a country without coal, and as you've seen, and this is not a good example, but there are very few trees left in all of Ireland. The forests were denuded by early agriculture and then the English in terms of providing lumber for homes in England. But the bogs themselves were a wondrous sight. And as we drove across the western part of the country, the smell of peat burning was omnipresent. It was coming from all the homes, and even when you entered a pub, a block of peat was often in a fireplace, taking the chill off the air. Let's now talk about the people in Ireland. The first people arrived basically in this area shortly after the Ice Age left us in about 8,000 BC. We have evidence of seafarers arriving along the east coast, followed shortly by cultivators and farmers grazing cattle, sheep, and goats along the western part of the country. It's very interesting to realize the age of the country, because initially, in 12,500, there were settlements on this land when it was part of England and Wales. And the Ice Age obviously wiped out the population and all living things. So we saw people return slowly, and by the end of the Mesolithic era, around the year 4000 BC, it's estimated that there were 8,000 people living on this island. Not a lot, but a lot more than we're used to. One of the interesting things about this island, and I'll refer to it later on, is it parallels so much the history of our own country and the Native Americans that lived here. This is a picture of seed fields. Stone walls encasing areas throughout a laid out system dating back 5,000 years. The oldest known architectural site in the world. This appears on a cliff sticking out into the Atlantic that you can see, where these fields divided places for growing grain versus grazing sheep, along with separating properties from one from another, and providing, again, a look back into the past. We don't get to see very often something 5,000 years old. During the Neolithic year, from 4,000 to 2,500, a multitude of burial tombs and sites appear across the whole countryside. Rarely marked, not necessarily on a map. You have to scour far and wide to find the locations of these. And then once again, upon finding them, literally getting out of your car and walking to them. This is a stone circle, one of 6 huge stone circles located in this cemetery. No one really has figured out what the stone circles are all about, but they tend to pop up in a lot of the burial places. Behind some of these stone circles is a burial tomb, significant in size as you take a look at the effort it must have taken to build a place to bury your dead. Across the countryside, we see portal tombs. Here, if you look closely, you can see what are called dolmens, D-O-E-L-M-A-N-S, holding up a capstone. And through that, people entered the tombs that go below. One of the most magnificent and breathtaking sights in the whole countryside is the New Grange Passage Tomb. Driving down a road and approaching this, it was as if the Superdome in New Orleans was half buried. As you stood there on what was relatively flat ground and realized this is a huge tomb. It's like the one we saw previously, but they've let the grass grow over the top of it, so that the only defining feature that you see now is this wall on this side. This gives you a close-up look of the entrance to the tomb. This was the only burial site that we approached and saw that had staff there. Here is a guide waiting to take people through this entrance down 200 to 300 feet into the center of that tomb that you saw from the outside. The other interesting part is this little opening here is a light shaft that on the day of the winter solstice, the shaft of light hits exactly the center of this tomb. And this is deemed to be the oldest astronomically aligned tomb in the world. To give you comparison, this was built about 900 years before Stonehenge and 800 years before the pyramids of Gaza. We're talking old stuff here. But as you descended down into this tomb, led by the guides carrying torches, you can just imagine the history of what happened for over 4,000 years of ceremonies, burials, and whatever else took place. Here's a better picture of what I talked before about. It was a portal tomb. You can see it as it stands alone with its dolmens and its capstone as people are wandering across the burial sites. And obviously, once upon a time, there was a pathway and a tunnel down into a tomb. The last place we stopped in looking at burial sites was not a site itself, but a display of Tuchalat, which is a home and a tomb still buried and unexcavated, but recreated based upon X-rays and carbon dating, showing a house over here, the entrance to the tomb here, and then two more side tombs. As part of this display, we also got to see a replica of what the Irish considered home. And they are very similar to the igloos that our Eskimos use, except they were built of thatch instead of ice. But round cylindrical buildings provided their shelter through the years. This gives you an idea of the Irish countryside, 800 AD. Changed dramatically, but still was dominated by Irish chieftains and tribes. As I said earlier, these tribes are very similar to the tribes we know in our country. Before this time, the only people that bothered the Irish were the Christians. The Christians came St. Patrick, who gets credit for driving the snakes out that weren't there, is also given credit for being the first missionary. Not true. First missionary was a well-to-do Briton who came from Palladia in early 400s and started the first mission to convert the Catholics. Patrick followed later, but obviously had a better PR man, along with creating a bond with the Irish that led them to have many of us believe that he was, in fact, the first one there, and the most important one, and that he's become their patron saint. When the Irish realized the changes that they were about to see, as Christianity, understand, was bringing a monotheistic look at the view instead of the polytheisms that the Irish believed and practiced. This is a picture of one of the earlier abbeys, significant because it's a place where St. Patrick first baptized people in the year 414. The other significant part of this abbey is that nave that you see there has had masses conducted in it since the 1300s, in spite of Cromwell's efforts to destroy all monasteries, including the burning of this one. The nave survived, and a week after Cromwell passed through, Mass was held in the altar. Down the road about 20 miles